and welcome to Shop with Sally. Welcome to my studio. We are going to talk this week about one of my favorite fashion references, known as punk, of course. I'm calling it luxury punk just because there are so many great options in the luxury fashion world for punk-inspired items now. And I think that they're classics. If this is something that if punk is something that you feel like you relate to because you grew up with it, or the music inspired you as a teenager, or the politics of punk inspired you, I feel like it's a timeless moment that you can bring into your wardrobe and have. I mean, I feel like a motorcycle jacket never goes out of style. I feel like great kind of worn-in t-shirts never go out of style. Leather pants, jeans, all these, basics of punk, I think are really timeless wardrobe pieces now. In the 70s when it first started happening, it was a very different conversation. It was a very different way of dressing. But now it's kind of a classic, I would say, especially in fashion. So to talk first about inspirations behind punk, I have been a huge punk fan ever since I was a teenage kid. I listened to California punk when I was growing up. In Texas, I also listened to the English punk. I was obsessed with political punk bands out of England called Crass. But then, of course, I love Fugazi and Dead Kennedys out of California. And I, of course, love the Ramones. The Ramones were amazing because they were punk, but at the same time, they were still pop music and everything that kind of goes along with those movements. And then also kind of at the beginning of the whole punk movement, there was Iggy Pop and the Stooges, who he's electrifying as a musician and as a performer, and obviously can wear leather pants and no shirt like nobody's business. So I just want to talk about a couple of books that I've used for inspiration for punk over the years. The first couple ones, first of all, you can't talk about punk without talking about Malcolm McLaren. Malcolm McLaren was the manager of the Sex Pistols, Bow Wow Wow, a ton of different bands. He also started the sex shop with Vivienne Westwood in the 70s in London, and he kind of made Vivienne Westwood. I mean, I don't know, I'm sure plenty of people would slap me in the face for saying that, but Malcolm McLaren really kind of fueled Vivienne Westwood, and he and Vivienne Westwood were kind of considered the Bonnie and Clyde of the punk scene in London in the 70s. So I think that it's great. There's a book on him, an unauthorized biography that I found that's mostly interviews with all the people that he worked with. I found it on Amazon. It's called The Wicked Ways of Malcolm McLaren. I'll put that up here for you guys as a link. But I think it's so much fun when you like a genre like punk. You maybe like the music, but you don't know about it. I'm a huge fan of going back and reading the history. So you've got Malcolm McLaren, you've got he who managed the Sex Pistols, and there's a lot of great books out there on the Sex Pistols. I'll put a couple links for those here. And obviously the Sex Pistols were a huge part in kind of popularized punk music, if you will. And then there's a great book called Please Kill Me. I have this in my little library here. The Uncensored Oral History of Punk. And this is a fantastic book. It covers everybody from the MC5 in Detroit to Iggy Pop and the Ramones, and then of course Malcolm McLaren, and and it also talks a bit about Lou Reed and all those guys, because they were kind of at the beginning, that 60s, 70s transition from the Velvet Underground style music into the Stooges, into what became the Sex Pistols or the Ramones, which was quick punk rock music. So the fun thing about, these guys, whether you're into the music or not, is looking at what they did. And of course, Debbie Harry, Blondie, even though their music wasn't necessarily punk, they were definitely hanging out and performing in incredible venues like CBGBs and all those places. And, Debbie was very glamorous, in my opinion, but she also had a lot of punk aspects to her, as well as Susie Sue, who's incredible to look at. If you Google image search Susie Sue, the pictures of her are just incredible. And that's where Robert Smith from The Cure got his whole concept for hair and makeup, was all because he toured with Susie Sue, and she was like, let me do a makeover on you. And then suddenly he's wearing makeup and has this amazing look that kind of, I think, helped define the look in the 80s after punk was a thing, the post-punk, where you start to get into, the new age and all that kind of stuff. So New Order and The Cure and all those more romantic, emotional style bands. not to digress too much, but I think that, reading books like this, they describe so much what was going on with all these different bands and the evolution of this incredible movement of kids and, and definitely rebellion. And I think every generation and every, all over the world always has, like, there were the flappers in the 20s who were the punks. There were the bohemians before that. And there were the beatniks, and now, there's like hip hop, gangsters and things like that I think are defining the not, I wouldn't call them outcasts, but the rebellion, and bringing forward like that they don't believe with the politics and they don't believe the religious views or whatever intolerance there is in the world. They're trying to express themselves as artists, usually in music, towards, a bigger thing. So not to get off too much into that world of politics and blah, 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 but to just think about how movements of teenagers, kids, people in their 20s, doing something insanely creative and creating a group of them get together and just end up being a whole movement. And I think that's what's so cool about punk. And I think with, with what happened with music coming out of like the bigger bands like Led Zeppelin and The Who and the Rolling Stones, who all had their own version of rebellion, punk was kind of the next big movement after those guys. Velvet Underground kind of being the start of all that. So, and Iggy Pop and the Stooges. So looking at those guys, I mean, they always had, fantastic art direction. I mean, Andy Warhol worked with the Velvet Underground. Lou Reed always looked incredible. Nico, I feel like, is still kind of part of that group, even though she does have that 60s vibe. She was always in black, and always, you never saw her in a dress. She was always like in a really amazing sweater, turtleneck, and like black jeans. And so I don't know, I feel like there's a uniform that was started with these guys in the late 60s and went all the way until the 80s. And it's, I don't know, it's pretty cool. And then I also love all the art direction. I mean, I found, this book is called Fucked Up and Photocopied, excuse my language, but that's what it's called. And I found them on Amazon for you guys. The guy who did this book also put together another book called Punk is Everything, Punk is Dead. And I found that one on Amazon at a reasonable price, so I'll do a link for you guys there. But these books are incredible because they just show all of the art direction that these bands had back then. And they just did some really cool stuff with collaging and, because this was back before everyone had computers and printers in their home. And, really they would be doing collaging and illustration, and a lot of it was just handwritten stuff. And then they would go, to do their flyers for their shows when they were touring. Then they would go to any place that would have a Xerox copy machine and make copies, and you would just get this really cool kind of collage-y fun effect. So I, as a stylist, I always look at punk for a lot of art direction inspiration for some of my shoots and for clients or different branding concepts I'm doing, depending on what the age group is or the inspiration. But, there's just always so many cool ideas in here because they were mixing so many classic, so much classic iconography from our past in America and Western civilization, if you will, to kind of get their point across. Sometimes tend to be a little bit prolific in the sense that they were always pushing boundaries, but that's what punk was about. So when you're researching your inspiration for punk, luxury being that you can now find the items that all these punks used to wear back in the day, but you can find them from nice brands where they're actually made well. And not that they weren't made well then, but, you didn't always get as nice of the leather. You didn't always get a nice quality for the stitching and all that kind of good stuff. But now you have plenty of great options from Saint Laurent. Eddie Slimane is totally, kept with his very kind of punk rock core, which I think is great. It's expensive, but it's good. Hermes has been doing studs for a couple years now too. But I just, I think that it's important whenever I'm working with a new client, whenever I'm working, whether it's a person or a company, and we're researching something like punk, I think it's important to figure out which people from the punk environment inspire you. And, looking back and doing the research, and I'll put also Sid and Nancy was like an incredible movie that Gary Oldman did that's got great inspiration in it. I'll put together a couple of punk movies for you guys to watch and check into here that will inspire, hopefully, your outfits. But I think it's, really looking at, again, kind of menswear as women's wear, what's sexy. And I just like the hard, powerful look that the punk people always had, whether it was the Sex Pistols with the, padlock necklace, or whether it was the Ramones that was just like a great t-shirt, a great motorcycle jacket, and a skinny jean with some dirty Converse. So I don't know, it's a fun world to play around. Here are some of my inspirations for punk, and I shop below, check out the movies, check out the books, and then kind of try to see like who from these punk movements you're inspired by. You're more inspired by the old California punk, or you're more inspired by the London punk, or you're more inspired by the early days of punk, like Iggy Pop and the Stooges, or Velvet Underground. So take a look. I put some collages here for you guys to enjoy, and next up for us will be going through the clothing shopping list of what you need to put together a luxury punk outfit. Okay, you guys, have fun, enjoy research. Bye-bye.